I'm Jean Leigh Palmer, and I'm the daughter of Herbert Leigh, the granddaughter of James P. Leigh, known as Jim, and the great-great of William Paris Leigh, and back to Thomas Leigh, who was the early ancestor of ours who came from Wilkes County, North Carolina, and settled in the then Granger County and later Union County, what is now near Walker's Ford Road in Union County. And in the early days, it was known as Hamilton's Crossroads. I married Warren Esau Palmer, the youngest son of Dr. Paris Palmer in Union County. I have two children, Cynthia Carol Palmer McDougal and Warren Mark Palmer of Knoxville and Maynardville.
Jean, tell us what your parents did for a living.
Well, we lived on a large farm, and of course farming was the main source of income. And in the early days of my father's life growing up, his father and he had large distilleries and had those until Prohibition, which was in the early 1920s. And then from then on, they had a big grist mill that took care of the community's needs for wheat and flour, and just cattle and that type of thing is what they did for a living.
Did they have a blacksmith shop?
And my ancestors had a large blacksmith shop near the old Hamilton's Crossroads section, and did repair work for horse wagons, did leather work, made saddles and harness for teams and that type of thing, and worked in the mill and whatever was available at the time. Mm-hmm.
Now, when your fathers operated when your ancestors operated the distillery, your father was delivery boy.
My father worked in the distillery and earned what his father would pay him, and he went on trips when he was 17 years old to deliver whiskey to Cincinnati, St. Louis, New Orleans, and other large cities. And when he became 18, he bought part of the farm, the old Hamilton farm, which was a vast number of acres, and the old store building, which we'll talk about later, I guess. But that was, and he had different people to operate the store, and then later he operated it himself and lived nearby.
Did you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother, Herbert Leigh Jr., and he's lived on the farm all of his life, and he and I both inherited half of the farm each, and he ran a dairy. My father and him ran dairy for many years, and that was a good source of income too at one time. And they delivered the milk to the Avondale farms in Hall's Crossroads. So that's
What are some of the things you and your brother had to do when you were growing up?
Well, actually, we did whatever chores their parents wanted us to do, and they saw that we were trained in doing whatever work, even though they had most of it hired done. We still had to do work ourselves too. I had to do ironing for my mother and help cleaning and that type of thing, and my brother helped out on my dad with the cattle and other things on the farm.
Where did you all go to school?
We went to Maynardville. I went my first year at Hubbs Grove, and I went from then on at Maynardville, elementary and high school, and then on to college at Ward Belmont in Nashville, and later University of Tennessee.
Did you go to a local church?
Yes. The Maynardville Methodist Church. It was near the Carr property in Lower Maynardville, and then later on after that was discontinued at the Miller's Chapel Methodist Church, where I still attend.
And you and your mother both were members of the FCE club.
Yes, we were. She was a member of the old Maynardville Home Demonstration Club, which I went with her as a child, and now it's changed names for the community, FCE, Community Family and family, community, and education. FCE.
Well, tell us about the big white house on the farm where you were raised. That was a beautiful home.
That was a
Very
beautiful
self-sufficient.
home. The whole farm was very self-sufficient. The old big house was the original Fate Hamilton house, one of the Fate Hamilton houses. He had earlier one, a log house. But this one was one big room. And then my father acquired that property and he built on a room or two. And then later my grandfather lived there. They swapped houses on the farm every once in a while. So he built on 2 more rooms, and as the years passed, they kept adding on until it became a big 2-story house, a beautiful home. But the original room was a large room, and we called it the big house because it was the original house that was there. And we used to have square dances in it, and in the early days, my mother and daddy did, and my grandfather played the music for the square dances. So those things were wonderful early memories of that house.
Right.
And I was born in that house too.
You and your brother both were born
No,
in
my
that?
brother was born in Knoxville,
In Knoxville.
at the old Knoxville General Hospital.
And you have still, at the side of your home place, there's an upping block, I understand.
Yes, there is. There's an upping block that was moved from my grandfather's place at the Mill Pond place where the old distillery was, and it's still standing there now.
Tell us about using that.
Well, of course, as a child, we ran up and down it and played on it, but we also we had an old cow that we rode all the time, and we would mount the cow from that upping block and any of the horses that were on the farm.
Tell us about the outbuildings that were around on your farm.
Well, we had the usual, we had an old log barn that was there, probably the Hamilton barn with the original old house. And it's still standing there. We still have it in. And then we had the old crib, which housed the corn that was fed to the farm animals. And we had an old big wash house where all of the washing equipment was kept.
And your grandparents had servants that did
Well,
most of
they
that.
just different hired people, as,
Different hired
as we
people.
called them in those days, hired people.
Yeah.
And there was somebody to come in to help with a lot of things, you
Yeah.
know. And of course, my father had a lot of work hands on the farm.
Yeah. And at that time, the road that went by your house was a main road to
To
Knoxville.
Luttrell, to
Luttrell?
Luttrell to the train station, and from there, things were shipped on into Knoxville.
Right.
So all traffic, such as it was, came in front of our house in that little old road, and it was muddy and it was difficult to travel on, but that was the only route down through there.
And they did
And,
things like drive their turkeys. and-
Yes. I used to go out in the front yard and sit and watch them go down with a drove of turkeys. I suppose that's what you call them. Anyway, several men would be herding those turkeys, and they had pigs, hogs that they took to a station. Anything that was having to be shipped to the city for.
Acid wood. and-
Yes, there were people over in the Kettle Hollow section who brought their acid wood by there, and it was stacked high on old, dilapidated-looking wagons, and the teams, horses and mules, were just struggling to pull it through the muddy roads and to get to the train station, and it was taken there to use as paper pulp,
Yeah.
you know.
I understand there used to be gypsies come through.
Yes, that was something we all look forward to every year or so. Now, they might not have been there every year, but mostly. And they would camp in a field across catty corner from the old store building. So we naturally liked to stay around the store with our father to see those gypsies. And they would come all dressed gaily, you know, and all that sort of thing. And of course, out back of the old storehouse was the hen house, and the merchants took in hen and eggs for to trade for necessities back then. And my daddy would always have that hen house full of chickens, you know, hens, roosters, or whatever. And by the time the gypsies left, there wasn't a hen in the whole place, because you never see them take them, but they would take them somehow. And their clothing was big, baggy, like, you know, fluffy sleeves and that type of thing. And they would just be loaded with whatever they pick up. And they would clean you out, house and home. But they were fun to watch, fun to be around. And we look forward to them.
And the circus, did the circus ever pass
Yes,
through there?
yes. When the circus was performing, and back in those days, they traveled by on foot, so to speak, and had wagons and cages for their animals. And when they would perform in the upper areas of, say, Middlesboro, Tazewell, and that section, then they would take a foot route down through our place and come in toward Luttrell to the train station. And of course there were the elephants, and there were the big fancy cages for the lions and the various things, and that was a sight to see. It was really a sight to see. And any neighbor children that could come to our house, if we knew ahead that they were coming, why, the whole yard would be full watching that.
Tell us, when your family ran that store, tell us about running the store.
Well, of course, my daddy, after he came back from Knoxville, he had the distillery in Knoxville, and after Prohibition, he came back and moved to the country and built a house there near the store, and he was the merchant, and of course, he sold just a variety of goods, everything from dry goods to foods, and I used to be there a lot with him in the store, and it was fun when we call them the drummers, who came through to take orders for merchandise. You know, they were out of big companies of Knoxville, and they made a trip every so often, stopped by all the country stores to take their orders. And then later, my father would either go into Knoxville and pick up the merchandise, or somebody would deliver to various stores. And that's the way we used to always enjoy seeing Jim Haynes, who would take his old big truck and go into Knoxville and bring back goods, and people would go with him to Knoxville, and it would be late in the evening when he would be coming back by the store, and my daddy would wait on him up there much after dark. And when he drove into the store, he would always be real drunk, and all of his people on the truck would be drunk. But it was really a funny thing to see and enjoy, you know, that type of thing. As a child, that was really fun.
Yeah. That store building is also the site of the first switchboard in Union
It
County.
is.
What
It
tell
is
us about
up in the upper level of the store. It was two-story, and quarters were available for someone to live up there, which my great uncle did live up there for a long time, and his daughter worked in the switchboard. There was one room closed off at the back corner of that, and that was the early switchboard.
And what was her name?
Addie Lay West.
And she worked that switchboard.
And she worked the switchboard.
Did you ever work it?
No, I stood and watched a lot of times, because it was interesting to see her punch in the buttons and everything, and listen to all the conversations too.
Yeah.
And of course, we had an old phone down at the old house, and it was a wall phone, and everybody in the countryside had a ring. You either had one ring, you had two rings, or maybe whatever. But when anybody's phone rang, everybody picked up a receiver, you know, and that was interesting.
Not many secrets.
Not many secrets in the community. But my grandfather had a phone which had a direct line into Knoxville. So, of course, anyone who had a need to call in an emergency of any kind and would come to his house and ask to use the phone.
When did you all get your first radio?
Oh, I guess our first radio was somewhere in the late 20s. And I remember the first one, it was a humongous thing that sat on a long library table and had the big horn-like type receiver, I guess. And we had neighbors to come. We let it be known, or my dad did, and we had a room full of neighbors the first night we turned it on. And then years later, we had a cabinet-style radio, which we enjoyed very much.
Yeah. Do you remember any of the programs that you listened to back then?
Well, right off, I guess Amos and Andy and that type of comedy program, I remember as a child.
Yeah.
I don't know what was earlier than that, but I remember those. And Ma Perkins was a soap opera, as we call them. You know, that was a good program.
Well, you're organist at your church, and so I think it's interesting how you learned to play piano and organ. Will you tell us?
Well, yes. When I was 4 years old, my father drew a complete keyboard on a windowsill. In the old house, we had bay windows in 2 front rooms, and on the windowsill, which was wide, he drew this keyboard. So he told me that if I could learn to play on that, then he would buy me, if I showed an inclination toward music, he would buy me a piano. So for 4 years, I pretended on a wooden keyboard. And at 8 years old, I came in from school one day and there sat a Kimball piano. So from then on, I've been involved in music. And I've been the organist at Miller's Chapel Church for 40 years.
That's wonderful. As time passed and the Great Depression happened, that affected everyone and their lifestyle. Can you tell us how that affected your family and their lifestyle and what you remember about it?
Well, of course, I remember that real well, and it was a devastating period of time for many people. The country people fared so much better than city people. We, of course, had a very self-sufficient farm, a large farm, and people who lived around us had food by growing gardens. They had fruit, they had animals, and fared fairly well. However, all the neighbors exchanged things. It was a cooperative effort back then for families to share with one another. And actually, I did not feel the Depression as lots of people may have felt it. I know we had friends and relatives who lived in the city, and they would visit with us just to get a good meal. And usually my mother would load them up with different food items before they left. She never let anybody leave our house without their hands full. So we got along and survived it, but we knew, and we went into Knoxville from time to time and could see the lines of people waiting for food to be handed out. So we saw the effects of the Depression more so than we felt it, really.
Do you remember rationing books and rationing
Yes, I do. Yes, I do remember the rationing books and the certain items, and that was a time when people would swap out different things. If you use more sugar than I use, you'd give me sugar coupons or this or that. You know, the people shared with one another on those, and really it wasn't considered an offense of any sort to do that, because I think the authorities understood that people had to do that in order to survive. So it was handled. There wasn't any fraud and that type of thing with those. It was just merely a swap out type of thing for people, but it was a lifesaver for many.
Do you remember the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC in Union
Yes, and that was quite an accomplishment. There were so many beautiful things built by them, and of course there was a camp that was near the old Cedar Grove over off old Highway 33. And of course, it was quite an event when the officers of those camps, you know, it was kind of like uniformed army men, and they were quite popular in the community with lots of the fair sex, and many of those people married girls in the communities. And I remember we had a lot of square dances in the homes, and those fellows would come, and it was quite a show to them to see square dancing. You know, many of them came from Upper East or somewhere that they weren't accustomed to that maybe type of entertainment, and of course they would always squire a young lady around somewhere, which was, you know, kind of to us younger ones was really something.
Yeah.
And
Do you remember any that married and stayed here?
yes, I do. Right around in Maynardville, even. Well, the Winters, Ida Winters married Ray Winters, who came from New York or somewhere up east, and she later was a superintendent of schools here, so was well known. And there was the Simmons, all these Simmons boys around here. Their father was one of the CCs, and the Phillips, Ike Phillips, and that family, their father was a CC. He married Sexton girls. So there were many around, more.
So it really added to our population.
It added to
didn't
the
it?
population, and many nice families have resulted from that. Mhm.
Do you remember where you were when you heard about Pearl Harbor being bombed?
I'm not sure. I think I was at work. I worked with the Department of Employment Security in Knoxville, and I think I may have been at work.
Did you have any relatives, close relatives, that served in World War II?
Well, of course, my ancestor, the old Thomas Slay, was a Revolutionary War soldier, and then his sons were Civil War soldiers, and one lost his life, Sampson Lay, and my great-grandfather Hendricks served in the cavalry in the Civil War, and I still have his saddle that he used. And so that history goes back then. My husband did not. He worked at Oak Ridge at that time, and he did not enter service.
You have your great-grandfather's discharge papers from the Revolutionary War.
Yes, I do.
And information about his pension.
Right. And he had a pension of $40 a year, and he later went with some of his children's in-laws to Missouri, to Kirksville, Missouri, and is buried out there in a military cemetery, and there's quite a big stone and commemorative stone in his honor out there. And they moved there to do blacksmith work because that was the gateway to the West, and they did harness and wagon repair and that type of thing.
There was wheat thrashings back then, too.
Yes. Usually someone who owned a thresher, as we called it, would travel the countryside and do thrashing, at a wheat time of the year. And we always looked forward to that. It was usually a 2 to 3 day affair, and my mother would cook, and usually someone would come in and help her cook meals for them. And they would either stay overnight, or they would always be there for dinner and supper.
Tell us what year you married Mr. Palmer.
I married in 1939.
And so you all, I guess, together could remember Norris Dam being built.
Oh yes. We remember well, and many changes were made, and his family were among many who had to move from the area because of the Norris Dam, and they later moved over to Maynardville.
Did you ever visit the site while it was being built?
Yes, many times. In fact, that was quite an outing on Sunday afternoon for us to take a drive to Norris Dam and all around in that area. It was-
What can you tell us about Mr. Palmer's family?
Well, actually, they go back to the same period of time that my family did in the late 1700s, and my husband's ancestor was the first sheriff, elected sheriff of Union County, and they have figured very prominently in the history of Union County. And my sister-in-law, of course, Winnie Palmer McDonald, is the author of several books pertaining to Union County's history. And my father-in-law was a doctor.
Jean, while the Lay family wasn't directed by Norris Lake flooding the land, there was a lot of changes that took place in Union County. What do you remember about those?
Well, of course, I remember a lot of the people moving and leaving their farms, people we had known who moved off to other counties far away. And I remember the establishment of the TVA offices in Maynardville, which brought in a number of new people, and we made a lot of new friends during that period of time. And then, of course, it provided employment for many of the local people around who had not maybe been working in public work. And so all of those changes, and it was just seemed to be a lively spirit of community involvement at that time.
A lot of the people who worked on the dam resided in Norris and stayed there.
Right, and it was quite an event to drive over through the town of Norris to see such an orderly little town being established for those workers.
Yeah. Children have a lot of technology today, and they use that for their entertainment, but that wasn't true in your day growing up. What did y'all do for entertainment as children?
Well, actually, neighbor children came together on whatever place they could find to play ball and to, they had swimming holes. My father dammed up the creek that ran in front of our house, and we had quite a swimming hole, and all the neighbor children would come. And that was quite an event. And of course, we all had animals of some sort that we either had as pets or just to care for, and that took a lot of our time. And my father had a little bull that was quite gentle as a small bull, and he built a wagon and made harness for the little bull, and we used that to drive all over the farm in and haul neighbor children.
Did you ever participate in any activities with the adults?
Oh yes, the adults had square dances all the time, and of course we naturally liked to be in the crowd of the dancers. And then my mother would have candy pullings occasionally and invite neighbors in, and then we'd have corn huskings. And usually that was a big event, and a lot of food was prepared, and a lot of really lively entertainment, music, and that type of thing. And then we had molasses makings in the community, and neighbors would gather. And then we'd have, once a year, some of the neighbors would rub bees, as we called it, and whoever was the hostess of the event would make biscuits, and then everybody would have the refreshments would be biscuits and honey after the evening, was over with.
Travel was quite different then too. How did you mostly travel from place to place?
Well, in the early days, of course, by the time I came along, there was motorized vehicles, naturally. But in the early days, most people had to get around with Shanks mare, which is their own two legs.
And you had horse
and
buggies.
Horse and buggies and wagons. And the more affluent people had a a pretty buggy and a nice horse. And then, of course, the others who didn't own a buggy would have just a team of horses and a wagon. And they could take their families even to church or wherever they wanted to go by wagon.
And one of your ancestors had the first motorized vehicle.
Right. My great uncle, Dr. E.C. Lay, had the first motorized vehicle. And that you can have that, you can do that picture. That would be a good time, there to show that, wouldn't it?
We'll scan that in. You've raised your family, but you've also had quite a career yourself. Tell us about your working career.
Well, I went to work in 1939, I guess, with the Department of Welfare, as it was known then. It's now known as the Department of Human Resources. And I worked there for 12 years and then transferred over to the Department of Employment Security, which the offices were in Knoxville at that time. But my early years with the Department of Welfare was interesting because I did case histories on the recipients, and we had a program for old age and a program for dependent children. So I was to establish eligibility for those programs, and on one occasion I was asking an elderly lady if she could prove her birth. She did not have a birth certificate or any other formal record. And the lady that came with her was a little lady that went with many people and knew about their heritage. So she came with this one lady that day, and I said, now can you make an affidavit that you've known this lady all of your life and you know that she is 65 years old? And she said, Lord God, honey, I've known her all of her life and long before. And then I was establishing the parentage of one lady who was, her children, who was applying for aid to dependent children. And she gave me the name of the father for each of her 7 children, and they were all different except the last one. When I asked her, she said, oh no, honey, I won't tell that. It's too close home.
You had some interesting
Oh,
clients,
some interesting,
didn't you?
really, it was. But those were 2 funny ones.
And then when you went to employment security, I bet you
Yes,
had
I
some
transferred
people
over to employment security and had a variety of duties there, which from one thing to another, I became regional manager of the training for state employees.
there. And how long did you work there?
I worked there 36 years. And I had a branch office over at UT, which helped provide finding jobs for students who wanted to help their spouses or even themselves with their school tuition and that type of thing. And of course, it was kind of interesting the day that John F. Kennedy was shot in Texas. I was interviewing a student from India, and of course it came over the radio about the assassination, and I was quite shocked, but he wasn't. He said, oh, that's common in his country.
Cultural difference. Do you have any other funny characters come into your office?
Oh, well, yes, we sure did, but as right now I can't recall any real event, I guess.
Well, you've been a member of Eastern Star for a long time, and
Yes.
Toby was with...
Toby was a member of the Masonic Lodge, J.C. Baker Masonic Lodge in Maynardville for had 59 years at the time of his death, and he was a charter member of the Scottish Rites in Knoxville. And I've been a member of the Eastern Star for 59 years, and still am, and have held an office every year. My daughter's been a 35-year member of Eastern Star. So, and my husband's family were quite involved in Masonic work. They all were longtime members of the Masonic Lodge.
Who are some of the early members that you recall?
Well, the ones who were members at the time we were involved in it was, well, Tad McDonald, and Garland Bridges, and Dewey Bridges, and Von Moore, and of course the women's organization, the older Moore and Ayler women were all members, and my mother-in-law, Granny Bell Palmer, was a 75-year member of Eastern Star, and 3 of her daughters later attained the 70-year mark of being a member, and they transferred their membership from the old Mineral Springs at Walker's Ford into Maynard. They transferred into Maynardville.
Where was the lodge located then?
The lodge was located over the old First Baptist Church here in Maynardville, the upstairs of it.
Was it in the same location as the Baptist church today?
Yes, yes.
One question I like to ask Jean, everyone we interview, is do you think you lived a good life?
Oh, yes, I think I did. I had a good family, and I had a good home life, an exceptionally good home life. Being raised on a farm is one of the most wonderful things that can happen to any child. I just wish that every child could be raised on a farm. And naturally, the one we had was such a self-sufficient, interesting place to live, and interesting people. And I feel that I was taught many good things by my parents, and some good habits, and some good work habits, and I would think I've had a good life, and I had a good family. My 2 children, enjoyed them very much, and I had a good married life, and that's
What
it.
advice would you give to young people today?
Well, of course, the first thing is to read and read and read, and learn all you can, and be prepared to do whatever may come. And that will help you to meet a lot of adversities, and obstacles, and things like that.